All right. So today we'll be talking about the anatomy of blind faith, which is the study of axioms and unknown unknowns. I'll keep this note around. There we go. All right. So I like to start every lecture with definitions that the speaker, me in this case, is assuming are true, or at the very least, if there's more than one way to measure a definition that is useful, because that's just about every definition, it specifies which definition is being looked at in this instance and kind of steers the wavelengths of thought to only look inside this narrow boundary, which does go other places, but for the purposes of this discussion is only going one place specifically. And today that is the study of blind faith, the anatomy of blind faith, axioms, and unknown unknowns. Tony?
I think I like and would like to adopt that format because I feel like some of my stuff, that would be it for me. Like, I feel like I'm focused on connecting with people and finding other people's definitions in things.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could give definitions in ways that would make people be like, that's not the definition. And then it would make them go off. So I really like that method. It's able for me to grasp the end of the introduction to know the context of where my mind can switch over into, this is the foundation. Now we're going to go somewhere. Even
That's
though
sort of
sometimes it's taken like half hour sometimes, I still like it.
So that's one of the things that I actually had to develop quite a bit because, and it still happens despite my best efforts. One of the things I struggle with is coming into a conversation on the wrong end of that. Meaning the person I'm speaking with assumes there's only one possible way to be talking about this because they're such an expert in this one narrow area, that they don't see that if you forget about experience and study the architecture of ideas in general, there's always questions you can ask that will step outside those boundaries. So that's what happens kind of when ego clashes with definition, in the sense that if they don't see another definition and I ask for one, I'm the asshole. So that's, yes, getting around that is a very delicate process.
Because how can it possibly be anything other than exactly the way I see it? And you should see it that way and that way only. I know exactly what you mean. What?
My response to that was, oh, that doesn't matter. Why should we talk about that? That's what it feels like, man. I hate it. But that's life. You know, if you're alive and you're a human being, you're going to run into not being understood. So you can cry about it and hope that everyone else suddenly learns to be you, but only in the ways that you agree with ahead of time. Or you can plan for this and realize that you're not going to be understood. And here's what you can do to help yourself out of that. So this class assumes that you're going to be misunderstood in the future. So if that's not your experience, this is going to be worthless for you. That's a nice little false dichotomic sales technique right there.
I like that, Jester. I felt every vibe of that.
Yeah.
I got all the nuance. I got the false truth in. Yeah, I was with you.
A lot of
all right, so Anatomy of Blind Faith, the study of axioms and unknown axioms. I don't want to waste your cloud recording time.
Unknown. And I would say actually a lot of time when people argue that a dichotomy is false, that's actually a false classification of logic. The dichotomy is real, its relevance is false.
I'm going to send that to the dojo.
So yes, it is true that these two things are there. It's more of a disguise of a correlation without causation. But yes, the dichotomy is real. The relevance is false, or it is misleading, intentionally so. If it's, yeah. So anyways, so we got start with definition. So axioms, we've covered that before. So I'm going to continue to use the same definition that I've used in other lectures, and that is An axiom is a piece of information that does not change. An axiom is a truth. An axiom is an unarguable point of information. All right, that's an axiom. It's where the buck stops. You can't ask why an axiom is. An axiom just is. So there is no, it is a first link in a chain of cause and effect. That is an axiom. That is, if you say, well, what happened before that? Or why is that? We're not allowed to ask that about an axiom. That's because that's the definition of axiom. You can ask that about anything except, you can ask that about anything. You can even ask that about an axiom, but the moment you do and you change it, it ceases to be an axiom. It's something else then. It's something that can change. Axioms don't. They're always the same thing. Yes.
In the visual representation of perspectives, we have points, lines, squares, cubes. I think the simplest way that I understand your axioms thus far, or the best way for you to, make it clear, would be to use those visual representations.
Yep.
So the point, the line, the cube,
The axiom, yes, and that's the,
and the
that's,
dimension.
that's exactly what it is. The point is the axiom. So that's why when people make a point, people think they're speaking universal truth. Because they don't know that they say they're not measuring anything. This is just true. Well, that can only be true if you can measure the same thing 100 different ways and it always is true. So it's possible. It's possible to say that. But if you can't rectify certain questions and you say the question must be wrong because it produces a paradox, well, your axiom is bad and you should feel bad. And you will, because your subconscious will make you. I don't have anything to do with it at that point. It's just our natural response to being wrong. If you have a paradox, things that don't make sense, there's a problem in your logic. A question has not been asked. An assumption has been made that shouldn't exist. An axiom has been created that is not reliable. A false axiom. A mistake. It's a math error. It's being able to look at a thing and realizing that it is not irreducible when it really is. So that's an axiom. An axiom is a one point that is a zero dimension, and if you make a point, you're measuring it against yourself. That's the way that works. So axioms are tricky to find before you realize how to separate yourself from your observations. We covered that in the last lecture in detail, how to do that. So if you need a refresher on that, go watch that, because I can't sum that up in 2 hours, because I can't sum that up in 2 minutes because it took me 2 hours to make the case for it. But the point is, you have to be able to figure out where you are measuring from, and that can't be a thing that moves, which means it can't be you, because you move, you react, you're alive, you change, you grow, you age. You have emotions, you have good days, you have bad days, high energy, low energy. So if it is just you are not a stable fixed quantity, which means the first thing you have to do is build a scale to measure yourself against it. That doesn't change. Most of the time, that scale will be, this is the best I've ever felt, and this is the worst I've ever felt. And pick a percentage, and your mins and maximums can increase, sure. But as long as you know where you are on that line, that gives you a chance to start to measure things using the same distance every time. Because if you change and you always measure against yourself, you're going to get different results. It's like your Stretch Armstrong on a humid day trying to build a table, and your yardstick only goes so long. But if you use your hands to measure and you Stretch Armstrong, your hands get bigger, smaller, well, that's a bad way to measure. But if you're a robot and your robot hand is always 5 inches across when you stretch it to this length, you can rely on that. It's a different way to think about that, using a little story there. So that's the first step, separate from the measurement. So that's an axiom. You have something, Tony? You were leaning like you were highly interested in something.
Well, I put on the security camera for the living room so I could see the kids,
Mhm.
and I realized I had tilted it down so I can't see the kids on it. So give me a 1 minute break. When actually I unmuted or leaned in the first time, it was because I vibed with when you said you can't sum it up in an hour lecture or a 2 hour lecture.
Yeah.
Every time I pretty much think, oh, who else can I invite or who else would connect with the material? And I think part of the reason these are getting more enjoyable for me are because I'm starting to see more of why the prerequisites were necessary to you.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I gave the prerequisites to you on trust. You know, like I'm giving you this time, I'm just learning, and now yeah, well, I guess I already expressed part of that in the chat. All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go tilt that camera.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the point is, if you watch these videos and you get something useful out of them, that is 100% the goal behind them, because that was 100% the goal for me when I was thinking about these things. Like, this is all stuff I made for myself. So, like, I'm not only the president, I'm also a client. And so, this isn't like an academic pursuit for me. This was a very real problem, a very real set of problems that I had that were hurting my life. And my life was getting shorter every day I was alive. And I was very aware of this because I understand that people get old and die. So I could feel my time leaving and my potential was just stunted in ways that were painful. So this helped me. And if me talking about it helps somebody else, an odd piece of information there, an odd piece of information there, I know how important the right piece of information can be to a person, because it's not about the information you have, it's about the information you're missing that limits you. Nobody's limited by what they have. People are limited by what they're missing. People can use things they have in ways that turn out badly for them, but they have the option to do so. So the difference being someone else is just helpless, who can't do a thing, right? You put those two people next to each other, one has a choice, and another doesn't have a choice. Who's got more control over their life? Because the one who has the choice could choose to act exactly like the person who doesn't have a choice if that was the right answer. The person who doesn't have the choice can't choose to act any differently because they don't understand there are more options. And that's what this lecture is about, so to tie this all back together. So the first thing we talked about was axioms. Axioms are points. They can measure from all directions, and as long as they check out. And another way to say an axiom is a very specific kind of measurement. Okay, it's like it's a setting of scale is an axiom. If you say A equals A, that's an axiom. It's a self-referencing axiom. But now so that is an axiom. That's the mathematical definition of an axiom, is blank equals blank. And no matter what you do with that number or ratio or constant or whatever it is, you can always put that in a box and say it's X, because X can be anything. It's a placeholder. So X equals X is an axiom. So if you can find two things that compare very well and very reliably, then you can make a measurement and say, this is true and this is true when I measure this. So there's always three pieces of information when a person is making a valid point. So that's another thing. How do you know if there's an unknown unknown? I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but there's a check. It's sort of like if somebody walks into a room of millionaires and says, I have a lot of money. I found $20 in my coat pocket the other day. The person is going to be excited and think that they have a lot of money. And for them, they might. Like they could be, one meal away from digging out of the garbage. $20 will save your life in that case. But in a room full of millionaires, what you have done without realizing it is announced your own limitations with pride. I think $20 is a lot of money. And the millionaire would say, to who? So the millionaire would know to ask the question, in what circumstance is this true? Because despite popular belief, many millionaires are self-made. The ones that get the attention are the mommy and daddy stories where people need a rich person to point at because they have money and they don't. So yeah, there's plenty guys out there who had mom and dad give them money. But guess what? Where did mom and dad get the money? Somebody made it first. Somebody created it first. So that's where go ahead.
I think that's true, but I also think $1 million isn't a lot of money.
Right. So if somebody came up to you and said $30 is a lot of money, they'd be showing their limitation to you. A limitation of imagination, if nothing else.
$1 million isn't a lot of money in the context of wanting to amass it, in a sense. Like I could, if I found $30, I would definitely think that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to find.
Yeah.
Like, so, context, but I vibe with you on that.
So I have no children. And I can put this in context because this is the difference between individuals too. Like I have no children, no plans for children. My wife and I, we both work. So we're DINKs. There's an acronym for that. Double income, no kids. And DINKs are they have an acronym because they're a valuable demographic. Sort of like the homosexual market is very similar. Double income, no kids, usually. There's adoption, there's this, there's that. But for the most part, two people want to spend their time together. They have money and no desire or ability to produce children either through choice or medically. Fine, that exists. So for me, $30 is almost worthless as an amount of money. But $30, I would give somebody $30 if it would save me 15 minutes. Why? Because I have $30 to spare and I don't have the ability to make 15 extra minutes. I can make more money. I can't make more time. So I'm going to prioritize a replaceable resource for an irreplaceable one. But if you have children.
That's a core pay ogre principle.
Yeah.
That is a very core pay ogre principle. The way I think the world should work is everybody should be able to do anything they wanted to do whenever they wanted to do it. And I think we'd all be just fine. Because I think people like us are curious and intellectuals, and we'll keep inventing technology that'll keep pushing people forward. But I see no reason everybody can't be clothed, housed, and fed with today's technology. Like today's. Yeah. So it's a core pay ogre principle.
Here's the thing that makes that not work. And it's a human perceptive thing. And it's slightly off topic, but you mentioned it. The more people understand that another person's time has value, the closer we will get to that type of world, because right now we don't believe that's true. And that goes in every dimension. So when I say another person's time has value, I'm assuming many people, and rightly so, go to a mental conversation with themselves about minimum wage. And so-and-so needs to be paid a living wage, and so-and-so needs enough money to get ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. But let's think about that in terms of equality, right? Equality of value, your value as a human being, and your value as a human being can be measured in time. Like if somebody, and we do that with our criminal justice system, we take time away from people as a punishment. And if somebody gets killed, all of their time is taken away from them. And that's a very serious thing to either do or to be involved in or to say is necessary, even if you're in a position of authority and somebody you think would take a lot of people out if they weren't taken out themselves. So that gets very tricky very quickly. But it has to come down to, if there is a way to measure people that is fair, it's to measure their time. And there's two ways to measure time. One is, how useful is your time to the people around you? Meaning, do people who interact with you need to spend some of their time to recover from the process? because you take from the system. Okay, fine. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's a lot of examples for that. Like you go to a fast food restaurant, that's exactly what's happening. You are taking from the system. It's fast food, right? You are speeding up your food at the expense of somebody else. And that person has agreed to be compensated for that sacrifice at an hourly rate that may or may not reflect their true value in either direction. I have a tough time with the $20 an hour minimum wage after I go to some restaurants and get my order. Because the cheese belongs inside the burger. Like it doesn't, it half melted over the top of the bun and running down the side, half stuck to the box. Not a pleasant dining experience. Now, get what you pay for, I understand, but I don't want to pay more for something I'm already not satisfied with. Well, and I'm paying a current amount. So where that conversation gets tricky is everybody wants their time to be valued more than their neighbor, frankly. Why? Because people recognize when their time is taken from them, they lose potential. So they might not say that that's happening, but anytime you say somebody else needs to, that person needs to do blank. This person needs to take care of X. This person is in charge of this. This person is not doing their job and they need to. You could be right or wrong in those judgments, but what you are doing is saying, another person needs to give me something that will take their time from them. And that's the link that I see forgotten. Oh, we need a $20 an hour minimum wage. What about everybody who's a part of that? Not just the workers. Because those costs, now for anyone who understands business, I'm going to tell you, if you've never run a business, there is a 95% chance if you tried to run a business using what you know right now, you will fail in the first year. And that's not me being mean. That is me quoting a statistic about how many businesses fail in the first year. Which means that 95% of people who think they understand how business works don't understand it enough to survive for 12 months with a head start, which is somebody else gave them money, a bank. You didn't even have that money most of the time when you started a business. So you understood business so poorly, 95% of people. So I'm saying, if you're the 1 out of 20 who's run a business and done it successfully, great. Or if you know you've got XYZ mapped out, I'm not talking about you specifically, any overly sensitive business majors out there. But I will say that if you've never run a business and you've had no business education, if somebody gave you $100,000 to start a business, very good chance you'll lose it in a year. Probably less than that. Most people can't understand their business is failing, and they don't shut their doors until their suppliers stop giving them credit. So on top of failing, you lose what was given to you, you borrow from everyone else, then you declare bankruptcy 19 times out of 20. So everybody who you owed money to, they get screwed. What that means now is everybody who's part of that supply chain, thousands of dollars in all these different directions now, they have to work harder because you knew how it worked. You knew how things were. And you were going to go in and change the world of business, which has been alive since Mesopotamia. But you had it right. And you were going to do this and this and this. And it doesn't, and this isn't anybody's fault because we don't broadcast how to do business 24/7 like we do the news cycle. Where people get into trouble is they only hear people talk publicly in terms of business about employment rate and minimum wage. For the most part, taxes gets thrown in there every now and again. And so people are led to assume in their infinite wisdom that if they can decide what the right thing to pay somebody is and what the right amount of taxes to pay are, then they've got it all figured out, because I'll give these people jobs and they'll work hard for me and they'll do this. And so many assumptions get baked in there. But then that's the macro level, right? So you go down to the micro level and this is where we get into unknown unknowns. The way that they appear is, here's the difference between somebody who's run a successful business and somebody who wants to do a good thing and open a new business. First of all, it's the optimism. And I don't mean optimism is a bad thing. Optimism will keep you alive during your first year when you struggle, because even if you do it right, it will be a struggle. But optimism will blind you to your own incompetence. And there does not exist a wealthy human being on this planet who does not perceive themselves to be in a perpetual state of incompetence. Because that is why they always try to get ahead and evolve. If they were satisfied, they would stop. Innovate. That's what you hear from the top guys like Musk and Zuckerberg. The next thing, the next great thing, the next generation, the next model. Make it better, stronger, smaller, faster. Those aren't just things that companies, decide are good. Those are the things that sell, because it's not what we have now, it's what do we need tomorrow. That is the most profitable question that a person can know the answer to. So that's the other thing. This is an old saying in business. Established markets are for suckers. You feed the beast at that point. You think you're going to make a t-shirt better than China? You think your mug has a phrase that's going to, maybe. You're not going to do it cheaper than China. You might find a small corner and be able to carve out some independent wealth, but they will be better at it than you. Why? Because they've put millions of people, and nobody can outperform the work of millions of people. Sorry, you have to be really good for that. But if you can find an untapped market, something that hasn't been done before, a problem that didn't exist until recently, that doesn't have a solution currently. Like Facebook didn't exist. MySpace took a shot, didn't get it done. Facebook happened. That was a need. People didn't know they needed to be connected. People didn't realize that Facebook was the same thing as telepathy. So people like to have telepathy, even if it's on a screen. That's why they don't want to put it down. It's a sense of power. It's the literal ability to expand it's like astral projection on a screen. Except you don't need to focus or have any Zen. But anyways, so when we talk about in the business context, an unknown is problems
I thought about a great.
What's that?
Do you want me to? I thought about a great meme that expresses that. Do you want me to look for it or just keep going?
I would say make a note of it and circle back later.
I'll send it to the dojo.
You go. So when we're talking about the anatomy of blind faith, so a couple more definitions here. I know I'm a little off track today, but we'll get there. So blind faith, we talked about axioms. We already talked about anatomy. That's just the construction of. If it was a thing, here's how it's built, the blueprint. The blueprint of axioms. Blind faith means a faith that is blind to itself, that is not the insulting version of the word blind faith that you hear thrown around on message boards. It's far more literal. It is belief you don't understand is belief. It is assumption you don't understand is assumption. It is a thing that you assume is true that you don't know you are assuming is true. That is blind faith. The reason people have issues with blind faith is because of how people react to finding out they have blind faith in something. You got two reactions, really, not three if you count apathy. But the first one is, wow, I didn't even know that was happening. Good job, thanks. I'm going to work on that or think about it, or now my mind has been expanded to something I didn't know. And the other one is, how dare you tell me that I don't know what's going on? How dare you tell me that I have faith in anything? I know. That's the kind of asshole that we all become at one point in our life. when somebody tells us we're wrong. And the thing is, you might be right when you say it, or if you could, that's the thing. So when I talk about blind faith, I cannot stress enough how subtle it is. Okay, Tony, you're my measuring stick. How fucking subtle am I when it comes to words?
It depends on the topic and what you're trying to express.
How subtle can I be?
Say what?
I changed the question. How subtle can I be? You have to measure degrees of subtleness. How far, how minutely can I move that needle at a time? How's my precision on subtlety?
The way we work and the way the jester archetype works is the changing, moving goalposts. For example, if I was
you got
trying to get you to say something, I wouldn't tell you I'm trying to get you to say it. I'd ask questions that lead you to say it.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't working, and if I wasn't having fun, then I can move that to be something else that I choose. Or like, so how subtle can you be? Too subtle, where people miss the point.
Okay, so that was fair. That was the reference that was the answer I was hoping for, and you gave it to me. And it's from personal experience is why I asked, because I have a hard time measuring my own subtlety and giving an objective response to that. But I can do that through Tony, who understands interaction with me compared to interaction with everyone he's interacted with, which is a far larger sample set than I have when it comes to how subtle am I. He says he can be so subtle that that guy doesn't even get the point across. And I think I might be doing that. So my point is, for me, that is the appropriate amount of subtleness in that situation. For whatever reason, it might not be effective. But I have decided that this level of distinction is appropriate here, and here's why, and here's how tiny close it is. So when I talk about blind faith, and I say these things are really fucking subtle, that is the level of invisibility I'm talking about. You will not sense these. You will not. Your eyes, your ears, your skin, your smells, your touch. These are things that you have tuned out without realizing it. That's why you're blind to them. You're literally blind yourself to them, is a better way of saying it. And so that's kind of where this subtlety comes from. It comes from the most powerful generator of invisibility that you can experience as a human being. And that is your mind's aversion of a thing. If your mind decides it does not care about a thing or does not like a thing, you will have a very difficult time getting past that. Why? Because you have to tell yourself that you're wrong is why. People don't like to tell themselves they're wrong. Why? How dare you? Because I'm right all the time. I don't know. It's a survival thing. If you're wrong, you're not stable. And if you're not stable, you're surviving on luck. So people like stability. That's kind of how your brain can produce that, right? Like, so you will see a thing and you won't understand how it can be two things. That's a lot of things. There's a lot of things how. For example, I'll use just a couple of quick hot button examples to set the spectrum of that. You won't realize the thing is two things. Things that make people react very strongly in one direction is there's never a reason for violence. That's a feeling some people have. And no amount of conversation could convince some people that there is not a specific instance where violence is the right answer. Fine. So that person in their life, away from you, away from interaction, if they observe an act of violence that is positive, they will not see it. They will not remember it. They will not discuss it. They will not acknowledge it. And if it's pointed out to them, they'll explain it away quickly with a number of ready-made answers that transform this apparent positive use of violence into what it really is, which is a negative thing. And here's why you have to call it a negative thing. And I'm going to give you 8 steps that transform this one thing into this other thing. Those are a valid set of 8 steps, right? So maybe they do get from here to there. But what they forget is that each of those steps needs to remain valid if their logic is going to have any meaning. And if they're making a chain of logic that begins with, this looks like a positive use of violence, you can't have that as your core. You can't have it as your core position when you argue against it. You can't use a thing to argue against it. You can use a thing to check if it's consistent, right? But you can't use a thing to defeat itself and prove something else. And that's the way that logic works. Is it just becomes easier to get away with the more steps you put in between the thing that's very real, very observable, and the thing that you are trying very hard not to observe, which in this example would be the positive application of violence. And someone else can do the grunt work, not the grunt work, someone else, you know what, I'm dancing around something. If you're living in a world where the answer is always the same, you're going to be limited by that until you change or die. And that's everybody. And that's everything we do and don't understand. And that is the bedrock underneath what it means to understand unknown unknowns and how to interact around them and how to know that you're caught inside one. Because that's the real takeaway is I don't care if anybody believes this part is true. This is the background information. This is the part where I don't need you to see what I see for you to be able to use it, right? You can skip to the end and try it. And all this stuff that I'm saying that leads up to it, it really doesn't matter. I put this out there because there's a lot of people like me who can't understand it without this. They need the steps, or maybe they've got missing information, and this covers so much of it that it's likely that somewhere in this massive dump of what this idea is, because it's being explored from so many angles, there's the one piece from the one angle that you were missing. And when you cast a wide net, you're more likely to be offering that piece in some way, shape, or form. And then the person could help self-identify which specific track they need to go down and expand on, because it's like folders and subfolders. Any point you can go and do a lecture like this. You just have to know the scale of your lecture and how deep you want to go. So my scale of these lectures is the very tiny. This is the quantum of consciousness, right? It's cognitive physics. And a lot of these ideas are very quantum in nature. So they're very small measurements. So it takes a while to go anywhere. So we're talking about these unknown unknowns. And that was one example, the violence. So let's say another one. A person could say, it's never a good thing to give money to a homeless man on the street. You should give it to a charity. I've heard many people say that. Don't give a guy, you're just going to go buy booze with it. And you've got some people who live their life by that. They say, you know what, I'm never going to give a guy money. I might give him a sandwich. I might go get him a hot meal and take it to him, but I will not give that fucker money. Okay? There's other people out there who realize not everyone with a sign is looking to get stoned or wasted. There might be percentages out there that make that far more likely. And if you're living on the street, there's a good chance that well, you got to do something to take the edge off, and getting drunk is cheap enough. But to just say that one equals the other, no, that's obviously not true. There's guys who just can't make it. They got mental illness or no infrastructure, or you can go in 100 directions and find 100 stories for someone who, for whatever reason, couldn't get their life together. And that's important to realize that happens. And that's one of the things I say to people who criticize my ideas is, you are welcome to criticize my ideas. My ideas come from inside me. So if you're going to criticize my ideas, we're going to find what is inside you first, so we can do an accurate comparison. And if you're bitter and angry and your life's a piece of shit and you're divorced 4 times, you've got depression, anxiety, gender dysmorphia, body proposition, whatever, and you're angry at me for saying that maybe if you did some soul searching and realized that nobody else is in charge of fixing your shitty life, because even if they were, they're not going to. That is the thing that is really being measured when a person disagrees with a method. They're disagreeing with that which produced that method and the possible success, the possible feasibility of the idea. That's what's being judged. So if a person who's just angry and disagreeable comes and says words, there are ways to measure if those words deserve to be weighted disproportionately to the level of precision behind the measurements that are behind their ideas. So my point is, if you make an idea and you don't like it, you have to be willing to measure yourself against it. The person who had the idea has nothing to do with you at that point. They don't even need you. They shared a thing they have. They don't care if you like it or don't like it. They might hope, like me, that it helps you. And that's how I feel. I put my ideas out there. If they help you, great. If they make you angry, go fuck yourself. Why can I say go fuck yourself? Because you were already angry at me. So fuck you twice. I can't pile on any worse than you already have it. So I might as well go to town. You're the worst human being in the world. You can fall in a wood chipper. A person might say if they were prone to silly outbursts like that. Anyone who knows me closely will say I'm not prone to silly outbursts like that. Silly outbursts usually a lot better. So unknown unknowns. That's what it feels like to be trapped inside one. You won't understand it's happening, and if somebody tells you it's true, you'll probably tell them no. And if you're that person who's trying to tell you, you'll probably tell yourself no. And what happens when that happens? You get depression and anxiety. Specifically, if your unknown unknowns are pointed at a belief that says you have no control over your life. So if a person says you have control over your life and the ability to change your mental state, and the first thing you do is say, no, I don't, and here's why. Well, proving my point. Somebody's told you a choice is there, you're saying the choice is not there, and you're behaving like somebody would behave if that choice wasn't there. And there are other people who exist in the universe that aren't you, who are making different choices, and they're getting a different outcome. So to me, it's pretty dang clear where this goes and what the common denominator is. But that is the heart of cognitive physics, is you need to be able to remove yourself from that, because otherwise you're going to feel like shit every time you figure out that you were the reason that things went bad. And you'll feel like double shit if things went bad because you were trying to do something good. That's a real tough pill to swallow. You think it's hard to see when something's hurting you when it hurts you? Try to find things that hurt you when you think they're helping you. You don't talk about invisible. That is very subtle. So that is what it's like to be inside one of these unknown unknowns. If you experience any of the following symptoms, you may be trapped inside an assumption you don't know you're making. Irritability is a good one. Disagreeableness, anger at friends and loved ones. There's a chance that you're not seeing something. At least that's what I assume until I make sure that's not true, or at least as best as I can. So there's a test. All right, there's a test. Well, if you can find a test that's better than this one, you tell me and I'll upgrade my methods. So for now, this is the best you have in terms of accuracy. So it works for me and used as directed. If you want to test that a piece of information is not blind, at least at a cursory level, just like if this was troubleshooting, this would be are the cables all plugged in? You go and you make sure the cables aren't loose. This is that version of that sort of diagnostic when I'm talking about this method. Somebody gives you an idea and you're worried that there's something you don't understand about this idea. You can't figure out, you just sense that there's something off. Maybe because you've used one of these methods and you're getting the right answer that tells you you're missing something. So let's assume that's happened. The first thing you do is give it the old spectrum test. First, is this person presenting information as a fact or as a situation? If they're presenting it as a fact that doesn't change, that doesn't have context, that is context independent, if there is only one way to measure a thing for it to be correct, that is the axiom. It does not get rid of other axioms that are true. Meaning, a person can say, if I only look at this, and I only look at this, and I only look at this, and I only conclude it's bad, then this means that. So a person can go, they call that in science, they call that, no, not science, in logic and debate, they call that ad hoc. You just keep adding until it fits. So what you're doing is mathematically, you are saying A equals B. And someone else says, oh, it doesn't equal B when you do this. And so you add another term. Oh, but then you do this. Okay, what about that? But then you do this and that and this and that. And so now your thing that you have said equals B clearly does not. But you say, no, I just do this and this and this and this and this and this. But fine, you can say this and this and this and this and this. You can't say A equals B because you did all of that. All of that invalidates your first measurement. That's how it means to present an axiom as fact. You can do that. And here's how you know you can trust one of those, because these are the other two tests, right? People do that all the time, and you need to do that to have effective communication. So what do? We're just confused forever. We're humans, so yes, but that's not why. Here's a different reason. So you have a piece of information that can only be measured one way, but that way is clearly defined to you ahead of time. So now you know you're dealing with a stable axiom because it has all the parts required. Axioms by their nature require structure and boundaries. Technically, I can say everything is true. Everything equals true. I dare you to prove that wrong logically. Because you can't. You have to say something to add to that and change it for it to not be true. That's really the only one you can get away with. I think, therefore I am. That's a pretty good one. Beyond that, those things to me are like diamonds. Okay, they're hard to find, and naturally, they're hard to find, and you have to be under a lot of pressure to really come up with one. So for the most part, you want a stable axiom. I'm going to give you the DIY version. Pick a thing to measure. Pick a start and a stopping point, a limit, boundary, right? It's true when this is, it's not true when this is. And then test it. So that's the basic test. Am I inside an unknown unknown? Well, what's happening? My reality isn't matching my prediction. So I've got to assume that something's not true. So if I look at this thing I do and, well, hang on, wait a minute. Like here's an example, a personal example of unknown unknowns, what they can be like. Say a person doesn't have, let's just say a person is depressed. That's a common enough one. And if you can't imagine depression, even though it's a poor substitute and it's not an accurate substitute, just imagine the worst day of your life.
My internet connection is unstable.
Look like you shook loose now, but now you're fuzzing.
It says it. It says my internet connection is unstable.
Okay, I got a little bit of robot voice for you. How am I coming through? Still good? Tony might have to join on his phone or something. He does that sometimes. So I'm just gonna keep going because this is I don't wanna lose my place. I lost my place. I hate it when I do that. I'll just ask Tony. He's got a very good memory. He can tell me where my train of thought was when I stopped. Welcome back, Tony. I'm actually getting a little warm. Take the sweatshirt off too. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, it was how to test if you're inside one of these unknown unknowns. And that's the first thing is if you want to, like, yes, imagine the worst day of your life. So now I'm getting feedback from Tony. There we go. All right. So imagine the worst day of your life, right? You just feel terrible. And for whatever reason, beating yourself up for it too. Man, this is all my fault. I'm just a worthless human being. I got no control over my life. Everybody hates me. And there's no hope. And you know what? There might not be. Maybe it's true. Maybe you got 2 days to live and now you're at the end of your story and not the beginning. That's gonna happen to everybody. Everybody's gonna get to the end of their story. You hope that when that happens, you put a few good chapters in there. Maybe ended with a happy ending instead of a disappointing one. Like I wouldn't want my book to read that here lies deceased Tom Brisby, 90 years old, having, I don't know, masturbated consecutively for the last 79 years of his life without missing a day, having accomplished nothing other than the world's largest collection of used up tissue. Oh, and he also managed to balloon up to 500 pounds. I wouldn't want that book of my life story to be delivered to anybody that I hoped would respect me. Right? But the point isn't what's in the book and what makes the book good and bad, because when you die, your book's done. And you're the one really that has to know if you feel like you're good about that. So that's my position. Am I leaving a good story for myself when I'm done? Because that's who the story is for. The story touches other people, but it's for me. It's from me. It's in me. It is me. Right? It's you. You are the story. And so if you're the storyteller, then you gotta know what your options are. What kind of stories can you tell? It's going to be different for everybody. Your setting plays a part of that. Your circumstances play a part of that. Everybody gets to try something though. That's for sure. So unknown unknowns and how to protect yourself against them is the easiest protection against an unknown unknown is to assume you're experiencing one all the time. Why do I say that? That sounds a little fatalistic, right? Why would I just assume that I'm wrong all the time? How would you get anything done? Well, if you're highly neurotic, you can't, because the fear of being wrong will paralyze you. So work on that. Number one, you have to be okay with being wrong. And that will help you whether you do anything else with your life at all. You're going to be wrong sometimes. Everybody is. I'm wrong.
Recording.
Oh my God, Tony.
Again, sorry. Oh,
There we go. All right, good? Good. Now I got to find my train of thought again. Yeah, assume that you're wrong all the time. That'll help you whether you do anything else with it or not. And why do I say that? So I'm going to give you a little math proof. This is a quick and dirty thought experiment. And here's the axioms it's going to use. The first axiom is the universe exists as a single entity that one could understand as the universe. That's the axiom. The universe equals the universe. Okay, there's no arguing there. Like this, it does. The universe is itself. We're identifying the universe. Fact two, axiom two. This is a measurement, and it's a measurement that I claim is true all the time. The universe is bigger than you because you are inside it. I think that's true. Physically, it is, anyways. You are in a thing, you are part of the thing. If there is any part of that thing that is outside of you, you are less than it, just by volume. So that's fact two. So the universe is bigger than you. We get that. So if the universe is bigger than you, I also, as another axiom, throw down, because I'm building a multi-dimensional thought. Multi-dimensional thoughts need multiple axioms to be stable. That's where you set your measurements. And if your measurements are good, you can build things with them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm building right now. The universe is itself. The universe is bigger than you. Our ability to explore the universe is limited in ways that will prevent you from accessing 100% observation of it. Meaning, that's the axiom. I say that's always true. Meaning, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't look at everything in the universe. It's too big. And you have no way to get there. And parts of it are hidden. And parts of it are invisible. And parts of it we don't know exist. So that's axiom three. So now I have currently a two-dimensional mental construct, because I have 3 points and that makes a triangle. So now I can talk about everything that is inside the concept of the universe existing as one concept, us being smaller than the universe, and us being unable to measure all of the universe because of current limitations to technology and sensory ability. So everything that's inside that triangle is valid. So I'm going to add one more point, because that's the minimum number of axioms you need to make a three-dimensional idea. And that idea is, because the universe can be explained as a single thing, that means that when a thing is explained, if it is true, it must be able to explain its harmony with the entire universe for it to be true, because it is inside the universe and is a distinguishable part of the universe enough that you can identify it. So what that means is, if you can look at a thing as part of the universe, you need to understand how it is part of the universe to fully understand it, if the universe can be understood as a single concept. There is a translation effect that must exist, because you are taking a part of a thing which you've agreed is a thing and are saying it is valid. So if it's valid on the small scale, it needs to be consistent with how it fits into the bigger picture. It needs to be free of contradiction. So now I have those 4 points.
Why can't you just list that as an unknown unknown?
What's that? Why can't you list that as an unknown unknown? No, what I'm saying is that here's why. I'm making
you
a
said
proof for why you can't assume anything else that you don't know the full story. That's the proof. That's what these 4 points prove. Anybody about anything, if you don't have the proper boundaries. So why would a person always assume that they're wrong? Was the statement I'm defending? Why isn't that a mentally defeatist attitude? So I'm just making the logical proof that whether you want it to be true or not, it is true. That everything that you think you know is wrong at some level. So it is not, do I have truth? It is, how much of the truth do I have? And in what context do I have the truth? So that's the difference between do I understand this? Or do I understand this completely? Do I understand this to its theoretical limit? The answer to one might be, I understand it well enough. And that's fair, because we can go down to the Planck length, which is the shortest distance human beings have imagined. And to show you how short that distance is, if you took a square meter and took the number of Planck lengths inside that square meter that would fill it up, there would be more Planck lengths inside that square meter than there are square meters in the universe. So that's how tiny the slices can get. You can fill the universe with 1 square meter if you pack it tight enough. Most people don't need that level of precision. And I would say I don't need that level of precision in my life. You do things because you're trying to get things, or you're trying to get results. You're doing a thing to have a thing happen. Most of the time when we live. I'm doing this because it will make me blank. So when that is the circumstance, the measurement for your success has to be, how often does what I do get me the thing I want, or the thing I was trying to get? How accurate am I when I do a thing to getting what I think will happen? That's the level of precision that matters. And what I'm saying is that when you lose precision, you lose any choice that is smaller than your largest chunk of information, right? So if you understand the concept and it's 1 block, you understand that block, you get it really good. That might be a point that you have. But say that another person comes along and sees that block and everything about that block that you see, and they see it's a block. But they also see that that block is made up of 8 cubes. They see a lot more than you do. And then if you go down into the seams and you find that each of those 8 cubes is 8 more cubes. And that happens 5 times before you get to the end of cubes, and then they turn into triangles for some reason. Well, you would have never, ever predicted by looking at this 1 cube that there were triangles inside it. If that cube has any water inside it, there's an H2O molecule that's a triangle in there. But you wouldn't think that just looking at 1 block. So the unknown unknown, or let's say this, let's say that you are the H2O atom. You're not going to assume that if a bunch of you get together, there's going to be a lake. Like it's too big. But then 1 clever hydrogen molecule that's been anthropomorphized in some sort of Disney movie about the journey of the self would say, well, wait a minute, how come all of us do this? And I've been drawing what happens, and look, there's a fish, and this must be the bottom of a boat. And they've got like all of these things where things have, now all of a sudden the H2O molecules are gaining self-awareness to realize that they're an ocean. So one is, it's all about resolution. So to find unknown unknowns, you must change your resolution. And this is not easy to do, because if I'm talking about changing your resolution, I'm talking about changing your level of detail and how close you are and how much you're looking at. Big picture, little picture is what I'm talking about. And when I say big picture, little picture, I'm not talking about big picture and slightly smaller picture, which is how everybody seems to treat that. Big picture, little picture is not 1 step. Big picture, little picture goes all the way down to the microscope. And it goes all the way up to the universe.
Why not just call it dimensional?
You can. I was trying to give it a little bit more of a transitional quality of message, if nothing else, just to make it more readily understood from a broader metaphor. Your metaphor is good too. It's a perfectly valid way to say that. But the point is if you want to find unknown unknowns, there's a reason that we've adopted the phrase change your perspective. Changing your perspective is not only about changing your direction and your angle. It's about changing your focus, your distance to it. You need to get closer to it, or get further away from it, and realize that because of the way matter works, matter is mostly empty space. I don't know if you guys know that. Matter is made up of mostly empty space. It's electron clouds that take up giant spaces between these tiny little atoms, and that's what makes our chemistry. So if you want to, I think it's like the football is the nucleus and the atom shell is the stadium. I think that's the right ratio, but it's giant like that. And so the point is, if you get close enough to anything, you can go inside it. Why? Because you're also small enough. But you have to make yourself that small to fit in the cracks. Otherwise, it's just going to seem like one piece. You're going to look like you're walking through a wall. Why? Because that wall is how far or close you want to get to that. It's like reaching the limits of your own vision. What happens when you can't read something? We all know what to do. You get closer to it. What happens if you're too close and it's not in focus? You move it further away. But that doesn't easily translate when you're communicating ideas, because most people don't understand that's an option. Or it's like saying, why do my eyes hurt in the Matrix? It's because you've never used them before. Your eyes can only see one distance. There was, that just gave me a flashback to a cartoon I watched as a kid, and I can't for the life of me remember the name, but it was like one of these like trash heap superhero movies where you had all of these misfit heroes that were just, they were just the throwaway superheroes, and that was the gimmick. And you had one that was just like a giant ear, and all it could do is hear. And you had one that was a giant mouth, and all it could do was be a megaphone, and it was loud and annoying. But one of them is you had this guy who could only see 2 miles away. He couldn't see anything closer or further away than about 2 miles. And that was his super derangement. So in the right circumstances, he was the guy. Anything that was 2 miles away, he was the right guy. But he wasn't the right guy when you need something closer or when you need something further away. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about getting closer to an idea. What that will feel like is breaking through barriers. And those barriers are the unknown unknowns that you've put there. Specifically, when you reach a level of resolution that you say, that's it. Doesn't go anymore. You put the boundary there. So everything that goes beyond that, which is either true or untrue, just becomes one thing because it's always the same answer. Doesn't happen. Doesn't matter. So I'll give you an example of that using depression, because this was useful to me and I think it could be useful to other people. How do you get out of depression using this? Now, this is a true story. This is how I got out of depression. So the first thing I did was analyze my situation. I took a measurement. Where am I? I made an axiom. I feel like shit. Okay, I understand that. I can measure that. I can say these days I feel this shitty and this day I feel that shitty, and you get like this little shitty spectrum, and after a while you can kind of map the minimums and maximums, and I say, okay, this is on any given day I feel this crappy about my life. Fair enough. That's what was happening to me. I was just paying attention. I start paying attention to it. So then I started, and for a while the thought process was this: man, my life sucks. Man, I just wish I could be happy. Oh, things would be a lot better if these people would just, if this thing would just happen. It was so big. It was so, I was so far removed from the process, I may as well have been observing it from an outside perspective, which is what depression and anxiety feel like, by the way. They feel like that because that's what you're doing. You just don't realize it. You don't realize that's what's happening. At least I didn't. So anyways, so then I start looking at that. So yes, I can map my own feelings over time, but what if I map them a little closer? And now I start saying, okay, what if I'm with certain people now? And that makes it a little better and a little worse. And because I've been paying attention to how I feel over time, now I can pay attention how I change differently when I'm around X, Y, or Z individual. And I started realizing some people made me feel better. Some people made me feel worse. And we all understand what that means. So I'm not saying before that I didn't understand that there were some people that made me feel bad and some people that made me feel good. Like I had preferences of friendship and I knew how to spot people who were bad. But what I wasn't doing was I wasn't measuring my internal self while that was happening. I was just seeking it and basking in the response to it. I was reactionary. It took no action. Everything that happened, I received. So that included all that. But then when you're reactionary, you can pay attention. It's not against the rules to pay attention and react at the same time. So that way, now I have more information. I know how I reacted and what happened. Well, guess what? Now I have an axiom. It's a very specific axiom, but I can say when I talked to that person on that day, I felt that. And that's a true moment. So I start collecting these moments. And then I'd say, okay, so if I hang out with these people, I have more of the good moments. So I started hanging out with those people more and started hanging out with the other people less. And it didn't cure my depression, but it made me a little happier. And so I carved out that little part of my life of how to choose my company better. And so now I'm in this same situation. So I've corrected a variable, right? I got a change that I could measure. And now I'm in a new state, right? This is my new normal. So I repeat the process then. So I say, okay, man, I still feel like crap. Yeah, this person needs to do this for me. And man, if these people would stop being assholes and the world's going to explode and people are voting for the wrong things and that's going to endanger me. And I was neck deep in all that. The world and its instability was what I experienced because I was expecting the world to give me stability. So I started measuring this. And I'm like, I measured all the things I wanted. And I said, what do they have in common? What am I not thinking about? And I said, all of these things are something someone else has to do for me. That was the common denominator. And then I said, I'm assuming there's nothing I can do to fix this. And guess what happens after that? I was already acting like that was true without realizing it by doing the measurements in the first place. Why would I do that if I didn't think it was going to do something? But I didn't believe it. Okay? I had a suspicion. I had a tepid curiosity. I had an attraction to something that I didn't trust. We covered why that happens in the subconscious lectures. So go back and see how that magic happens, because learning how to listen to that is a great way to identify unknown unknowns in your life, because I'm going to tie that lecture directly in, but we're not quite there yet. That's the grand finale in 22 minutes. So anyways, yeah, all of that happens. And then, well, now I had a little bit of a brain freeze, right? Like I had a fight with what I just learned, because so much of my perspective was measured outside the assumption that this opposite thing was possible, that I didn't have anything to reference. I just knew that it was true because I wrote it down. At least I made a list in my brain and figured out that was there. So now I've got unmapped territory, and that's the unknown. That is, you literally don't know. Your body doesn't respond well to the unknown. And if you're prone to negative emotion, like if your neuroticism is high, or if you react strongly to information that you did not agree to listen to, is a better way of saying that. If you have no control over the strength of your reaction to information you didn't agree to listen to, then you are going to have a tough time with this one. And the part of that was, from personal experience, the toughest pill to swallow was I was a giant asshole. In every sense of the word, including to myself internally. I was worse to myself than I was to any human being. I made an effort with other people. I didn't care about myself. I was ruthless. And I didn't realize that's what was happening. I thought I was happy enough to be like, well, I don't feel like killing myself. I'm trying to do good things, and some good things happen around me. And for the most part, I've got a few friends, and I had things in life that were good enough to give me a reason. But when I assumed that good enough was anywhere near what I needed to not have depression and anxiety, well, that was my first mistake. That was an assumption. I didn't even know I was making it. It was an unknown. I didn't know that I should have thought about that, because it didn't occur to me that it was possible. I didn't think that way about myself. I didn't think I could change. If you don't think you can change, you don't think you can get better. If you don't believe you can change, you won't believe you can get better, or worse, or that you have free will, or that you matter. That was my unknown. And then after a while, all of my unknown unknowns were different. It wasn't, can I? Now the question was, how can I? And that's a change of perspective right there. That is a perspective changing question. Can I or can't I? Yay or nay? How can I? That is fixing one option and zooming in to literally break it apart into steps. That is how you change your perspective to go inward. How can I? Or a different question, what is that made of? Everything is made of something. I say that's an axiom. Prove me wrong. Everything is made of something. So until someone goes against that, I'm going to act like it's true, which, by the way, is how you get things done in a world where you assume that everything you know is not completely correct. That's an important solution, because some people, so once you get over the fact that being wrong is okay, and you can recognize that as a useful tool, that it becomes a useful diagnostic tool, you want to be wrong, because you'll care about being wrong in ways that fix it, right? There's two ways to respond to being wrong. One is, if nobody tells me I'm wrong, I'm not wrong. And the other is, if somebody tells me I'm wrong and I fix it, I'm not wrong anymore. Which person has more choices? The person who fixes it can choose not to fix it. The person who does nothing can only do nothing. That's the difference. That's the difference between can I and how can I. So that's how you zoom in. Or another way to ask that question is, what is it made of? I'll say that, many times as I need to. What is it made of? Because if you can't answer that, you have an unknown in your midst. That's the telltale sign. I don't know why that is. I don't know what that's made of. I can't break that down any further. I can't answer this question any other way. So that is the nuts and bolts construction of that. And watch how that pairs with the lecture that we did about the subconscious, specifically how the subconscious communicates with you. It communicates with you through reaction. It gives you a sensation without an explanation. It prompts you with a feeling. That feeling is an invitation to why from the subconscious. That feeling is not the truth. That feeling is not good advice. That feeling often, when responded to through fear or anger, is counterproductive and self-defeating and will make a person miserable. The only thing that is relevant in the beginning is that there is a prompt to why. And if it makes you angry, that is a prompt to why does that make me angry? And if the question is, because someone like that beat me up one time and I never really forgave them, that's what's behind all of those whys. And if you really want to unfuck your life, you need to figure out why you are bitter is something that happened to you that you're trying to make go away. And if that response makes you angry, visit what I said earlier about level of control over words you didn't choose to listen to. These are clues from your subconscious. I don't have anything to do with this. I'm just a messenger. I'm assuming on blind faith that there are people out there who will respond poorly to being criticized. I think those people exist. So if I pretend that I'm speaking directly to those individuals, even in this slightly cartoonish manner where everything's exaggerated to oversimplicity, which is because that's what I needed, it simple wasn't enough for me. I needed it to be dumber than simple for me to understand it. So I want people who are like me, who understand information like I do, to be able to pull it in that way. And that's the level of bites that it takes. So yeah, the point really gets made. And if it's the wrong point that causes a negative reaction, I'm going to be the worst person in the world, because I'll make the point 70 different ways to the point where it no longer becomes possible to lie to yourself. And that's the thing you need to be careful with. And that's what I'm going to close, wrap up the lecture on, is the last 15 minutes is, I just talked about unknown unknowns. I just talked about what it feels like to be caught in one and what it can happen. I talked about how I can test for them. I talked to how to identify them, and I talked to how to change your perspective in ways that will make them easier to identify. So why would I say that thing right at the end about all this really cool stuff that you can do and understand about yourself? And here's why. Here's why it's dangerous. It's dangerous if, or it's dangerous unless there's a boundary to that statement. And that boundary is when you assume that your personal journey is one that another person doesn't need to be ready to take before you're ready to go with them. A different way of saying that is, unknown unknowns are instances where we have misinterpreted reality on a fundamental level. And those aren't equal. Everybody has different ones. And that becomes obvious when you see the differences in success between people across any dimension you want to measure it. Some people get it, some people get it enough, and some people don't get it at all. And the difference is what they don't know, what they don't believe, they reject. That's the difference, what the limitations are. So a person has these, and there's many theories about why we have these. And I'm going to give you a theory that that covers everything. It covers the worst possible case scenario. So anything that is not this is slightly better than this, is my argument for it. So I'm going to give you worst possible case scenario and how to overcome that. And if it's easier for you or it doesn't apply completely, wonderful. That wasn't my journey. So you're going to get the worst possible case scenario, because I felt like I really got hammered with the dumb stick as far as cognitive consciousness, awareness, self-awareness went. Like, I got beaten to the Stone Age for knowing who I was. So this is how you come back from that. If you're me anyways, your results may vary. You go all the way to some of the things that happen to you. And people make these limitations for reasons that are strange, but they're not strange when you think about it. They're counterintuitive, but there's a logic to counterintuition. Counterintuition is a type of logic. So yes, it's not straightforward, but there's rules. It behaves in a specific way that you could learn if you're able to let go of your intuition enough to trust a proven system, right? You can trust a system that feels wrong if you have seen it in action enough to know that it works. Okay, this feels crazy every time I do it, but it always works. That's counterintuitive. So that's a conversation we have with our own intuition. That's up to everybody to figure that out. But the point is, there's a lot of evidence that says that we ignore things because we're afraid of them, or afraid of what they mean, or what they would mean if we didn't ignore them. And I'm gonna give you an example of that, a very personal example. This was something I figured out was an unknown for me. And it was transformative overnight. Cannot stress how freeing this one piece of information was and the number of doors that it opened. I kept asking myself questions, and I'm going to skip all the questions I asked and get you to the answer that my last why that finally made it make sense. And I'm going to tell you what I figured out because of that. So I did this whole process in reverse and got all the way down to the level of what is that made of? 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 And when I got to the bottom, I realized I had a mother who was so unstable that it didn't matter if you were good or bad. And she could change on a dime. And so what that did was it created an environment that was always dangerous, because it was equally dangerous at any given moment due to the unpredictable nature of how she was. That was what I figured out. Here's what I figured out was an unknown. I didn't realize I was consciously blinding myself or subconsciously blinding myself to all forms of transition. Think about that for a second. Think about what that means.
What do you mean by transition? Or forms of transition?
So when I say think about what that means, what I'm saying is that is a vastly diverse measurement. So every type of conceivable transition you can imagine, I had a problem with, to the point where I didn't want to look at it, because every time I saw that transition at a young age, I was taught that it meant I was in for something. So I associated all transition with a transition of energy in my home. And that imprinted so hard that I didn't realize I was understanding the world like the same way a person would understand a collection of high-speed photos. And my photos were always zoomed in because I was hyper fixated on details, and I didn't realize I wasn't changing my perspective either. So I was doing this with a very small square and mapping every part of my conceivable perspective all the time. Why? Because if something was changing here, I could look over here. That was why. It was to avoid watching things change. High anxiety equals high focus. ADHD means the inability to focus on any one thing at a time. And a fear of randomness would boost adrenaline and increase that precision even further, along with processing speed, reaction time, etc. So I had a decades-long full immersion in a high anxiety, perceptively dangerous environment that I could only see 1 inch at a time. And I could only see it 1 inch at a time because I was looking away because I was scared when things changed. So when I say that was transformative, that's what I mean. I wasn't watching people's facial expressions change. That's why I couldn't have emotional awareness in other people. That's why I didn't understand emotional cues. I couldn't watch their face. And even when I looked at their face, I couldn't watch it change. Why? Because I was always doing this, measuring everything all around the room. So whenever a person would change their face, I'd have an excuse to look away. And I mapped that in myself by watching videos. And I would watch the person and I would say, I'm going to stare at this person's face and I'm not going to look away. And I can't tell you the number of times that they did something with their face that changed it. And I found a perfectly legitimate excuse to look at something else that I would have never questioned in a million years. So seductive were the suggestions. That's what I found. So then what? Well, now I've gone from a world where it's not okay to look at things changing for a stupid reason that I had believed and followed and acted like it was true on a level so deep I didn't even know it was happening, to a person who realized this is different. This is okay. It was only that one instance where that wasn't okay. You didn't measure it right. You didn't put boundaries on it. You was an infinite set. It was appropriate to be afraid of transition in that setting because it did equal that. But everything that got built around that was wrong. And you see this with people who hate other genders. You've all seen the woman hating, my wife is this, and women just like guys with money and they're shallow, and that, you know, they just make women these slimy creatures because that's the only reason they can justify not being attracted to them, when it's really their cowardly fear of these women and what they might say. Like, you don't put somebody down unless you're worried that they'll make you look bad by comparison. That's a pretty true statement most of the time. And you might have a good reason. Like, if you want to put down a child rapist to make yourself look better by comparison, you're not going to find too many people that are going to argue with you. Hopefully it's not by a degree of guilt, and it's by an either or. But yes, you can do that. But what I'm saying is that these things get baked in. And if you go deep enough, some of them is, well, that guy's mom maybe made him feel 2 inches tall his whole life. And he just thought every woman was like that because the one woman he was supposed to be able to trust was like that in a way that destroyed him. And he doesn't know that. And so he's living life thinking this is true. And the only thing he can think of to explain that, other than, man, I'm a real piece of shit and I've got some work to do on myself, because women are just as diverse as anything. Like, there's different, there's a million kinds of men and there's a million kinds of women. And if you lined up everybody, you could find 2 people from every gender that were the exact same personality. I guarantee it. There's enough humans that could happen. But to pigeonhole an entire gender into one thing because of what happened to you, that's so deeply ingrained and so seductive and so unconscious and so confirmation bias reinforced, because you don't have anything else. That's the whole point of unknown unknowns. It's all you've got, which is going to transition into the end. So that's the hopelessness and the danger. So the danger of unknown unknowns for other people is they're scary. And if you don't do it by choice, you're going to run into things that you're avoiding on purpose. And somebody else is going to be doing that without your consent. And because of the nature of these unknown unknowns and what we do to ourselves psychologically to prevent ourselves from seeing them, you will so instantly and so fully be roped into whatever monster that they are currently fighting, that you're telling them doesn't exist if they just think about it this way, that you will become that monster to them. And they won't even be able to look at you. That's why it's dangerous. How do I know? Because I didn't understand this for the longest time. And the only way I could communicate to people was through my own darkness, like my defeatist attitudes is a better way of saying that. If you say darkness and people think, oh my God, what is this guy doing? I mean darkness in the sense that if I was a color, I would have been dark gray. I would have a cloud over my head the whole time. I was so defeatist. I didn't have any self-worth. That's what I mean when I talk about this. So I would speak to people, like even my positive things were so depressing. It was like, man, that is this guy looking at the bright side of things. What is he like on a bad day? That's the difference that I'm talking about, that you can find. So it's dangerous to just throw this stuff around. If a person trusts you and you are good to that person and you don't lie to them and you only tell them things that you have tested as stable axioms yourself, you've done the work. You're not just giving an opinion. You did the legwork. You know it's solid, and you make sure that you frame it right. Okay, this isn't going to make sense all, but if you look at this and you look at this and you measure this, you can count on this. And then you've done that work. You can share that with another person. And if that information is ever going to take hold in that person's mind, they have to pay attention to you long enough for them to see it as a concept. And people can't look at things they're afraid of. The only way to get around fear is repetition and trust. That's it. Repetition and trust. And you can trust yourself, you can trust the people you're listening to. So to wrap things up, how do you How do you do anything?
I can definitely vibe with that.
Yeah. So how do you do anything with that? How do you live your life? So there's a phrase that I'm going to give you that is my go-to phrase, and it is a phrase that recognizes its own limits and reminds you of those limits constantly, that those limits can change. Those limits are a snapshot in time, and that limit is your current ability to understand it, however deep or shallow it may be. So you get to the phrase, that's true enough. What is it? It's my own phrase. I use it all the time. Why am I blanking out on my own catchphrase here? This is unforgivable. I trust it enough to act like it's true until something better comes along.
Oh, yeah.
And included in that phrase is all of the homework I just talked about. So when I say something like that, that's my way of, that's like my Tom seal of approval, in the sense that, like, this is different from, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like, oh, this is what I think. I don't know. The first thing that came to my head, I'll talk about this and it's interesting. I haven't fact checked it or even checked it for logic. But when I say this is true enough for me that I understand this enough, trust enough that I'm going to act like it's true until something better comes along, there's a very deep and stable foundation underneath that has rules. So I have to know those rules and say that fits in this box, and as long as I don't go outside this box, I'm safe. And that doesn't go here, so I have this little area that I can work with that's always going to be the same. That's the goal of really this whole thing, is you want to make that world bigger for yourself. So that's the close. If you're going to use the anatomy of blind faith, an understanding of axioms and unknown unknowns to make your life better, the way to think about it is, imagine that what you can see is a shadow around you, and your goal is to make that light about how much you can see and understand as big as you can to get what you need. And no bigger, really, because it's effort to do that. And unless your goal is just to see how big it can get, okay, there's a number of competitions for size that are
I saw
popular.
both of you. And I heard both of you.
So have at you, I guess. But for the most part, get what you need and then enjoy your life. That's the purpose of this. So that's this lecture in its entirety. Do you have any questions, comments, additions, addendums, Tony?
Nope, I interacted a little bit more than I have before, and I think that went okay. I think if we look at the rewatch, at the point I stopped interacting, there's a key moment there to be discussed that would contextualize everything else.
Sure. I look forward to that when when I'm doing my next chat with you.
Kind of like on Monday night, how I said it was important to understand the different modes that we operate in a certain sense. At that point, it became me learning more from Tom to be evenly exchanged later or applied later.
Yeah, we've all got these little dichotomies where one of us has more than a partial truth than the other, and whenever that combines, it's going to feel nice.
It always all makes sense. The question in my back of my mind is most of the time just the infernal why.
Why
and
does
it's
it
just
need
the
to make
understanding
sense?
that it's a different perspective, and it's interesting enough for me to want to know.
So I can give you the answer to that, but the full answer behind the why the answer is true will take the rest
I
of the
gotta
lectures.
get to the kids though.
So this is the answer. The short answer is fuck. Forgot the question.
All right. It went from
Why does it need to be true? Why does it need to be true? So why
I said
does
it is true. It's just a different perspective.
why is that perspective necessary? So yes, this is what you can do with that perspective that makes it, not air quotes, I'd say necessary for cognitive growth, but that might be a bit hyperbolic, but it's very useful in certain specific ways. And now we're getting to how it's useful. Like, you've gotten little glimpses of it here, but there are transformative elements to some of these perspectives that lets you change any vibe into a different vibe and have a path to and from. And it's valid and you mapped it. So if you were a train conductor of free will, you would have a switchboard now where you could literally see all of the paths and you could say, I need this one. And then it would just offshoot. And you know how to make those vibes transition. So yes, it's a concept, but it's also a process. Thinking it would be neat and figuring how to do it. So this is the how to do it portion of that. It's here's my map, my step-by-step, my Tony Hawk cheater guide to doing the 720 through the clip through the wall into the secret level. So you got the kids. Later, bro.
Sounds good. I'll see you in the dojo.
All right.